Good morning. Thank you once again for joining us this morning on our video service. I don't have a lot to talk about this morning. It's going to be quick and uneventful. Our men's group is still meeting on Monday nights at 6:30 on Zoom. If you want to be a part of that, let Pastor Carl or Pastor Carlos know. Our ladies group is meeting on Thursday nights at 6:30 on Zoom. If you want to be a part of that, we'd love to have you join us. Let Deanne Paradis or myself know. Other than that, it's last chance for our Logos University Disciples class. If you want to be a part of that, let Pastor Carl know. We're doing that on Wednesday nights at 6:30, also on Zoom. So I think it's going to be a really good course. We kicked it off this last Wednesday, and our first assignments are due this Wednesday. So there's still time if you want to be a part of it. Today I'm going to let Pastor Carl talk about the tithes and the offering because he wants to talk again about the live streaming situation that we're trying to kick off. So we'll turn the time over to Pastor Carl. Thank you.
Well, there you guys are. Welcome back to the Father's house. I guess Penny already welcomed you, but I'll welcome you again as well. I trust you're having a great weekend. It's been hot out there. Today's going to be cool, but man, has it been a scorcher. I bet you all those people up at Sonoma at NASCAR, man, this weekend was a hot one for them. But anyway, I bet they enjoyed the races. There's still that race today, the Sonoma road course race. So I think it'll be pretty good. What about? Oh, we're going to talk about the wall. Not the wall. We're going to talk about live streaming. So here's the deal. Again, I talked last week and I launched this off that we're trying to raise that $8,000. It's going to be between $8,000 and $10,000 to be able to live stream our service so that you, when you're watching this on Sunday morning or when you choose to watch it, you'll get the full impact of the service, all of our worship, different things that are going on, special presentations and such. But as I talked about, we don't want to do that halfway. We don't want to start out and not have a quality program, live streaming program in mind, both video quality and audio quality. And that's just going to cost money for us to get what we need so that we're actually able to function well and deliver a good end product to you. As I said, we really need to raise about $4,000 for that, maybe $5,000 for that, because everything's going up in price. And the Spanish congregation is going to pay, that would be Pastor Azarte and his group are going to pay the other half. So anything that you can do to help would be greatly appreciated. I know there's some people that are watching that can donate. Some of you can write a check for $500 or $1,000. Heck, if we had 4 people write a check for $1,000, it would be paid for. I know people can do it. It's a matter of how important it is to you. The sooner we get it, the sooner we can get started, and we'd love to have your help. If not, we understand. You can give what you can only give 25 or 50 or 100. That's understandable too. If you can't give anything, that's okay. No strings attached. But I'm primarily going and looking to raise the money from you because you guys would be the recipients, being that you're in a remote location, to kind of the benefit of us putting together a quality live streaming event. So if you want to give to that, you can go to thefathershouse.org and there's a giving button. And then there is a category up there for virtual walls. What's it called, Penny? Stage remodel. So all you have to do is you can give separately there rather than your tithe and offerings to stage remodel, and then it will go towards the live streaming equipment. Secondly, the next thing is that it's, again, tithe and offerings. And so, again, you can give on that giving button and give and realize that, I know you guys are watching in a remote location, but to keep the lights on at the church and to keep it active, it just takes a lot of money. More today than it did yesterday, trust me. Anything you can give would be greatly appreciated. You can give on the Father's house, or you can mail a check to the address that's posted here on the screen in the lower third of this of the screen, and we will make sure that we get it. Or you can call us if you're in the local area, and we'll come by and pick it up if you're not attending church or wanting to still social distance from people for a while. Anyway, I just want to say thank you. You guys are always so gracious and so good to us, and we appreciate all that you do and all that you can give. So anyway, we're talking about the virtues. So I think it's important for us to talk about them a little bit more. And so I hope you're ready to talk about them. We've been talking about the virtue, started last week, about the virtue of love. And I picked a text to talk about out of Matthew chapter 22, where Jesus said that the greatest commandments are, "Thou shalt love the Lord the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy soul, all thy mind, with all thy strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." And he said, "On this rests all the law and the prophets." And so, with that, then, we were commanded. We talked about that last week. If you didn't catch it last week, you can go back and watch. But it was the idea is that we're commanded to love. It's not an option. We're commanded to love, which then places it kind of in the idea and in the position of a virtue. The same way that we're commanded to be just people, or we're commanded to be temperate. There's a responsibility as Christians and following the Christian faith that we would follow these different virtues because they're part of our character. They're part of our character development, and they're the way that we should view and treat people in our society as a whole by using and employing these different virtues. Well, so I want to talk first of all a little bit about how a Christian virtue, or how a virtue really is employed in the right way. This is going to be an interesting conversation here, so really stay with me here, okay? It doesn't matter what virtue it is. It could be the virtue of courage, temperance, which is self-control, justice, prudence, or faith, hope, or love, or any of the other virtues. And this is kind of the way it works. We'll talk about it. So in order for our actions to be virtuous, it requires three things. It requires the right reasoning as to why we're doing it, or the right motivation that we're doing it. The act itself of whatever it is that we're doing by way of our virtue, and I'll explain that, and the results of that, right? So anytime when we're talking about the use of a virtue, of a Christian virtue, there's always this idea of the intent of the mind, and then there's also then this act that we do, and that will get a good outcome. Now, if the intent is wrong, even if the outcome is good, it's still not a virtuous act, right? And if the act is wrong or not virtuous, then the end, whether it's good or bad, it doesn't matter, is not what they would call a virtuous act. The same thing that if you did a wrong intention and a wrong action and a good came from it, it wouldn't be a virtuous action. Now, I'm going to explain that using several examples. So the first example that I want to use is the idea that, remember when Jesus scolded the scribes and the Pharisees, he said, because you tithe of your mint and dill, right? But you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel because you neglect the greater things of the law, which is justice, righteousness, and faith. So we talked about that in back videos when we were talking about justice, but he's talking about the idea and this notion of tithing. So let's put this virtue connected together: right intention, right act, right outcome. Jesus has a problem with the way that they're giving their money. Now, the way that in the Old Testament that many of the scribes and Pharisees would give their money is they would bring their money, and when they had their money, what they would do is they would ring a bell, and all the people would watch them dump their money into the offering so that they could get praise, or they would be recognized as being righteous and religious men by those that were observing them. I want to tell you that Jesus has a problem with that, and that type of giving isn't a good act. Here's why. Is it good for somebody to give? It absolutely is. And is there a good outcome as to that money being used? Yes, there is. But there's a wrong motivation, perhaps, and what Jesus is pointing out to the scribes and Pharisees, there's a wrong motivation in the intention of why they give. You see, they gave not because they gave out of the spirit of gratitude or graciousness or generosity, but they gave with the wrong intention so that when they gave, people would watch them give. And as they gave, then what would happen is they would become praiseworthy. In other words, people would look at them and say, my, they're so holy. Look how much they give. Oh, whatever they might do. Look, he even tithes on the smallest things he tithes on. In that case, they're not doing it because out of a spirit of generosity or because of their relationship with God and God being ultimately the most generous and us following in suit. It was a wrong intention. And because it was a wrong intention and they wanted praise from other people, it is not considered to be a virtuous act. And Jesus is kind of scorning that. The opposite story of that is, remember when all of the scribes and Pharisees and the people are giving money in the temple, and a woman walks up who is a very poor woman, and she puts in what would be the equivalent of 2 pennies in today's modern society. And everybody looks and says, that 2 pennies, that won't go anywhere. And Jesus looked to his disciples and said, you see that woman that put in the widow's mite, they call it, or the 2 pennies she put in? That her offering is greater than all of the offerings that you've seen being given today. Because they gave out of their excess, she gave out of her need. And so there's this part in that where Jesus was saying she had a right motivation or an intent. She wanted to give to God. She gave her last 2 pennies to God. And so and it was for the right income because she wanted to be generous to God and to his house. And the outcome was good, that the temple, well, they only gained 2 cents worth of income, but the outcome was good because the virtuous act was good. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about virtues. Here's the second one. Another one that we can think about is by this way of a widow's mite, and about that being a virtuous act. There's a story that Jesus tells about 2 men that go into the temple to pray. And one was a tax collector or a sinner, and the other was a Pharisee or a religious man. The religious man stands before God, and he looks at this tax collector, and he says, God, I thank you that I'm not like this other man over here. I pray, I fast, I give a tenth of all that I make, and I thank you that I'm not like him. But the tax gatherer, it says, wouldn't even lift his eyes to heaven. And the only thing that he could say is, Lord, have mercy on me, for I am a sinner. Jesus then tells out of that story and asks the question of, which one do you think was justified before God? Well, you're right. It would be the sinner. Because the sinner had a right intention in his prayer, prayed the right prayer, and therefore it was a virtuous act of religion. It would the other way, looking at the Pharisee, when he stood there and prayed, and rather than having a contrite spirit and focusing on himself, thanked God that he wasn't like the other man. In other words, there was an arrogance and a pride in his religion. So in that case, he was there in the temple praying, but his intention wasn't right, and his act wasn't right because he was judging the other man. So therefore, at the end of the day, it wasn't a virtuous, or the virtue of religion, by using the virtue of religion, it wasn't a virtuous prayer at all. That's the way that the Christian virtues work. That's the exact same way when we talk about the virtue of love. Now, you're kind of going, okay, I've never really thought about it this way. I get that. I understand that. But let's explain it, okay? Jesus is going to tell another story that has everything to do with our intention and our action, and the result being the virtue of love. So we're going to go to the counterpart of the story. Last week we were in Matthew, I think it was chapter 22, where we talked about thou shalt love the Lord thy God, which was commanded. And the command's going to come back up again in a story. A Samaritan lawyer comes to question Jesus. And maybe they're the same stories, maybe they're not. But it comes up over and over in Jesus's work because he's relating, or these gospel accounts, because it wants to stress the fact of how important the virtue of love ultimately, and our love for God and our love for others, is in our Christian experience. There's nothing that can replace love. There's no greater virtue than the virtue of love. And so in that way, it's the bedrock of everything we should be as Christians. 1 John chapter 1 talks about, 1 John, the gospel, or letter, epistle, talks about love stem to stern in that book. And it's something that's very important to the Christian to understand the value and the virtue of love. It says, and so a lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, What is it that is in the law? How does it read to you? And he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And he answered him, you have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But, wishing to justify himself, he said to Jesus, and just who is my neighbor? Jesus replied and said, and this is a story he tells, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell amongst robbers. And they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. And by chance, a priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, who was on a journey, came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion. And he came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them, and he put him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, he took out 2 denarii, and gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I will repay you. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And he said, the one who showed mercy towards him. Then Jesus said to him, go and do the same. There's so much that we can talk about in that story. There's just so much to it, isn't there, when you hear that? Because you're really dealing with 2 holy men, a priest and a Levite. And then you're dealing with a Samaritan, who the priest and the Levite would consider nothing better than a dog. They didn't like the Samaritans. They would consider them to be half-breeds. They weren't of the full Jewish race, and therefore they were discounted from the Jewish society. But you would think that if there was a man that was laying on the road, and that he was half dead, and he'd been stripped of all of his belongings, and he was left there to die, you would think that a religious man, or 2 religious men going by on that road, wouldn't cross over to the other side, but they would stop and help this man and save this man's life. In this instance, though, what you can see is they had no virtue of mercy or no virtue of love for the neighbor. Now remember, this has everything to do with love, because that's what the context of what Jesus is talking about. So Jesus says, if you're going to love, this is what you're going to have to do. If you're going to love, what I'm asking you to do is to be like the Samaritan in this instance. Now the Pharisee, when he came by, highest order, I guess you'd call it, the religious orders, when he came by, he didn't want to be bothered by the man in any way, shape, or form. In other words, he had no intention at all to go and do what the virtue of love requires in taking care of another person in desperate need. And here's this man that proclaims to be a man of God, have a relationship with God, represent the people of the land on behalf of God, and shepherds the people of God. And yet what he does is, rather than helping the one small wounded sheep that needed his love and attention, he decided to ignore that sheep, leave him to the wolves, and cross over to the other side and go along his way. The second man, another religious man, a Levite, tribe of Levi, he comes along as well. And when he comes along, being a priest, he comes along and sees the situation in the same way. And he has no intention to display the virtue of love. Instead, what he does is he crosses over the same way that the Pharisee crossed over, and he worked his way on into the city. I guess I have to ask the question, how long down the road do you think they got until they forgot about that man? As soon as they didn't see him anymore? As soon as they couldn't hear his cry for help or watch him breathe? Maybe the priest and the Levite and the Pharisee caught each other on the road and began talking together about different things, forgetting the dying man that was left behind. In both of those cases, even though they were religious people, they failed in the virtue of love. But now the Samaritan comes, the one that's looked down upon, the one that the priest and the Levite wouldn't help on any day. But the interesting thing about the story is we don't know who the man who was fallen was. We don't know if he was a Samaritan. We don't know if he was a Jew. We don't know if he was a priest, a Levite, or it could have even been Jesus himself. It was a man. But to the Samaritan, who understood God and the virtue of love better than the religious people, saw the man, and rather than going his way and minding his own business, he got off of his beast, and he reached down and nurtured the man. He restored the man to health, bandaged up his wounds, put him on the back of his beast, whether it be a donkey or whether it be something else, and he put it on the back of his beast and walked the rest of the way to his destination with this man being on his beast, so that that man would not have to burden himself anymore. In other words, he did everything he could. He had the right intention and the right actions, and ultimately he takes him to the inn. And when he takes him to the inn, he gets him a room, he puts him in a room, bathes, cleans, feeds, puts him to bed, and knows he's got to be on a journey the next day. But instead of just leaving the man there thinking he'll be all right and still having concern for him, what he does is he goes and tells the innkeeper, here's the money for a few more nights for him. Would you do me a favor? Would you make sure he's taken care of? Anything that he needs, would you please give it to him? You know that I pass through here often, and that whenever I do, I stay with you. Do whatever it is that he needs. And when he comes, or when I come back, whatever it costs you, I promise to repay you. That man then leaves, and he goes his way on a journey. And who knows if the man that was healed, the man that was saved, the life that was saved, ever even had the opportunity to thank the man for what he had done. That man could have just disappeared. And that stranger never knew the face or the heart or the love which that Samaritan showed to him. Yet you see, the Samaritan didn't do it necessarily for the man. I mean, he did. But the Samaritan showed a more loving attitude and the virtue of love more than the religious men did. And so what happened there is, you see, when he saw the man, he had the right intention, the right frame of mind, saying, I've got to help this man. This man needs my help. I don't care what the danger is. I don't care if it's going to delay my journey. I don't care that it's going to cost me money. I don't care if it's going to cost me an extra bed and my time to nurture him. What's more important is this man. And when he left the money for the innkeeper to take care of him, he simply said, I don't care what it costs me. I care more, and I love that man more than I love my money. In that instance, he had a right frame of mind. He had a right action, and the outcome was right. Because all three are right is considered a morally virtuous act. That was the completion of love. That's what God calls us to do. When the Pharisees, or when the scribe that was there, the lawyer at that time was the scribe, he said to Jesus, well, the one that did the right thing was the Samaritan. Jesus gave him a command. He told him, you go and do likewise. Don't try to strain out a gnat on who it is that's your neighbor. Don't try to say that I only love those that are of the Christian faith, those that are in my own church, those that are in my family. I don't love other people from other cultures, other religious points of view, or other persuasions politically or otherwise. You see, when we love our family, even the most unlovely people do that. But when you love somebody that you really don't know, and you go out of your way to love them, and when you have to put them on your beast of burden and you have to walk to their safety, maybe you've discovered more about God than that priest and that Pharisee would ever know, because they refused to love. Question to you today is, are you willing to love? Are you willing to go and do likewise? The same for me. That opportunity becomes available to us every single moment of our life. When we walk into a building, into a store, into church, when we're walking and seeing people walk along and saying a friendly hi to them, stopping to help somebody that needs help. When we do those things, then what we're doing is we're doing the very things that good Samaritan did. What do you want to be? Who do you want to be? It's up to you. There is no more of a powerful virtue than the virtue of love, because love considers other people. It considers their needs, those things that are essential for them to live a life, and it asks for nothing in return. It doesn't seek praise. It doesn't seek glory. It doesn't seek fame or edification. Just simply do it because it's in you and it's what God would want you to do. Whether it's the widow's mite, whether it's the way that we tithe or we give, or it's the way that we pray, or the way that we deal with people, it all stems from the virtue of love. What I'm asking today is, will you be a Christian in this world and go and do likewise? I hope you'll say yes. I think that's all I want to say today. I hope you have a great day. God bless you.